Here we go. I'm going to start with Jean-Philippe. We're talking a lot here about change of climate, sometimes as a new thing. But hearing to your presentation, I guess that at Lagaton Vassal, that change of climate was noticed a long time ago.
Yeah, I think it's. I think after when I showed these images of the Farnsworth house, for example, it seems what else do you have to do as architects? To play with the air that is going from one side and going to the other side, to try to find the humidity close to the trees or to the lake, and then to see how it can go up and avoid and make a little current of air. And all of this is so precise, so delicate, but in many situations you can observe this. I was talking about the gardens in Granada, but when you are here under the shadow and you just have this little movement of air, it's wonderful. It's better than climatization, and it is because it's always different, it is always precise, it's always poetic. Mm-hmm. We really like this. We want to be more and more precise in these questions.
Which is your point on that?
I love it. It's great. No, I really admire it. I think it is beautiful. And also I think the approach and being so consistent over such a long period of time, I think is absolutely amazingly admirable. And I think also in terms of architecture and understanding changes, is that, we call them, in German you would say Verfasser, meaning you understand before the others, right? So meaning in Norwegian it's also Forfatter, which means you understand before. And I think to some extent, architecture is a lot about understanding before the others actually do understand the issues at hand.
Before the client.
Especially before the client. But that in itself has such a tremendous power that you might not even be in a position of understanding exactly what the change is, but you understand there is something, and maybe based on the knowledge, as I was trying to say, maybe you can also react intuitively to some of these things. It's like Alvar Aalto said, the thing with the wave I discovered afterwards. So in essence, you work with the things you have at hand, and all of a sudden you understand later what you actually did. And I think that's part of this sort of thinking with your stomach.
Let me have a look from the other side to the subject of this Congress. We are talking a lot about climate change, but times are changing as well, and clients and projects do also change. But you, as architects, remain the same in a way. I mean, you are the same persons. I would like to ask you about your constants, your essentials. So about what is always, in any case, a priority in your practices. Kjetil.
Continuous state of reinvention.
Can you develop a bit?
We are the whole architectural educational system is based on the references of certain types of habits. These habits become your greatest enemy because they're limiting in the sense of thinking freedom. You've been very clear about that. So that's why the core of what we're trying to do is to continuously reinvent ourselves in order not to get stuck by the habits that you adopted during your studies, and maybe things you adapted when you were young working for other architects.
Kjetil just said that habits can become enemies. When I look at your architecture, I doesn't look at habits as enemies. if you know what I mean, because you look like following quite a clear line, right? So will you say that even habits could be enemies, as Kjetil said?
No, yes.
Thank you.
Yes, no, it's because precisely it is, even if you have the feeling to seem to be on a clear line, you have to adapt your line all the time. You have to improve all the time. You have to, because also you are always confronted with a question that is never exactly the same as the precedent one. And this is what is existing. And when you say inventing, this is our job. And nobody asks us to invent. Never. We have to convince that we are there to try to find solutions to what appears like problems for all the others. Because when you don't take time to see a question precisely, you cannot see a solution for it. So you say it's impossible, then it becomes impossible for all. But precisely, some architects are there to find a way to solve this impossibility and to make something appearing that it will be totally different. It is invention. It is precisely this idea of inventing. Our job it is to invent. And I think this is, but we do that, we invent, but we also with our experience, with our mistakes also. By the way, each time we try to make better, and it is these little modifications that are so important. And I think also to invent, we have to be always, we cannot be sure of ourselves. We are always on a small line, on the edge, because we think that it is good, but perhaps we still have to for us ourselves to be sure of that, and then to continue and to improve and to make it a little better. It is this constant way of advancing, which is absolutely important. And we advance with plenty of things that we have observed. I remember Granada when I was a child. I think the observation is fantastic. The capacity of observation and listening is where we take our tools, we take our elements, we take our materials from that. And but we take it from Bangkok, or we take it from Spain, or we take it from Sweden, or we take it, and we are able to malax and to mix and to combine all these elements and to make experiment with all these elements. So it is quantity of things that exist that at one moment we can make a collage with them, we can superpose them, we can enrich them, we can improve them, and we can work with this. So it's elements from I like the agriculture, because when you are in the countryside, you are talking with a farmer, and he has a sort of way of thinking that is very interesting, and he explains you something that you don't understand when you live in the city. And you take this in your background and in your information, and it participates to the next project.
I would like to talk not just about architects, but about clients as well. Because architecture is a business which involves different agents, of course, architects, but clients as well. Will you say that your clients allow you always to develop your skills as professionals and to care about your priorities as citizens? Or, on the contrary, they can be more a constraint or a limitation to your work?
I don't think the client is an obstruction. I mean, without the clients, we wouldn't be able to do anything. I can't even finance my own house, my own home.
My question could be, how hard could it be to convince a client that things should be done as you say?
Well, I was trying to show how a wider involvement, top-down or bottom-up, can actually create a wider collective ownership to ideas and content. And it's all about inclusion in processes that lead to the understanding. If you have a client on the other side of the table expecting you to come with the solution because you're the architect, then it might not be the right client. But at the same time, there might be misjudgments happening on the way from A to B and from B to C, and that's when we start correcting them, putting them maybe back into a position where they can start to understand. Because the worst thing is not understanding. If the clients oppose your ideas if they don't understand them. If they understand them, and if they've been part of them themselves, they would normally walk quite a bit and quite a long distance to make that happen. I thought it was so fabulous, to say that twice the size of the apartment, half the cost, rented out for the same price. That's breaking the commercial habits. I love that. It's a way of convincing someone because they understand. And once they understand, they will hopefully follow. And then they come back after some years and do the same thing again.
Yeah, precisely, this question is difficult. We have tried perhaps 3 or 4 times to work in France with private developers. There are not so many in France. It's always the same big companies like Bouygues, Vinci, etc. So we have now the experience to work to make bigger and to make cheaper, or to make at the same price. But even for the developer, sometimes we can say we can make bigger and cheaper. He's absolutely not interested in that. What he wants it is to make exactly what he has just done, eventually cheaper. That is the only thing that he wants to do. Because he cannot immediately break all the flats and that he has sold the last years. He's absolutely not interested in this kind of thing. And we have tried sometimes to make 1 month working 2 months sometimes, but at one moment there was clearly one point where we are absolutely not on the same kind of thinking. At this time we prefer to stop.
But at the very beginning, for instance, how hard was to convince the client that instead of demolishing the old block, it was much better to do what you finally did? I mean, did it took a long time? Did it took a lot of discussion? Was it easy from the beginning or not?
It took a long time, and it's why also we make this study. I think now it was 10 years ago, the study plus, to try to propose an alternative to the system of demolitions. But when the machine is gone, it's extremely difficult to stop it. So also there is some political decisions behind this, and there is an economy behind this. An enormous amount of money has been taken for that, and to produce nearly nothing. But so, and on all the projects we have been working, I show 3 of them, but I think 10 of them were failed because we have not been able to convince. So no, it's hard.
Nowadays it may be easier.
It's always a little easier because you can show something that you have done and you can see the results. The project of Paris was very interesting because if you compare to demolishing and rebuilding, it was half of the cost. But in fact, the project of Bordeaux is nearly 2 times cheaper than the project in Paris. So after the time, your experience becomes more interesting, and you adapt. But so it's more easy to convince, but still it's difficult.
But would you agree, like for instance, Palais de Tokyo, that with a cultural client, that it might be slightly easier, that maybe there is a different type of communication? I mean, we've noticed that the client constellations within the sort of cultural projects that we've done is an easier connection. Yeah. The route is shorter, the way of explaining, the intensity, their interest is kind of more at hand. Whereas in housing projects, which are, or even other commercial issues like office buildings or whatever, And Bjarke could probably talk about this a lot if he's not left. But the issue is that the distance between us as architects explaining something and then the client reacting upon that, either you have to build them up from the very beginning, like from, like all the way, or you enter with the client which is already at some level of understanding. And we've found that to be easier in the larger cultural projects.
Yeah. After having a look at your presentation, one realizes that your careers have been quite different because your architectures look really different, right? I'm not going to ask you what you dislike from your colleague architecture, but I'm going to ask you what do you like the most of his architecture, and then you come next.
Okay, what I dislike the most is that I haven't had the opportunity to try what he's done.
Now, what do you like the most?
And what I like the most is that he's done it.
That makes full circle. Up to you.
What I like the most is that he makes perfect answers to all questions.
May I ask you for something more?
First, I like him as a man because we don't see it very often, but each time it's a pleasure. We have this Francis Kéré as a common friend, which is also nice, and also because we have so different architectures, but the curiosity is for me something that it is the most important. So I am always really interested, excited to see how he's thinking, how he's making his project, because it's precisely it was totally different with me. So for me it is this curiosity to practice. It can be for some artists. It's always extremely exciting to hear about precisely somebody that makes the things in a different way than you. Mm-hmm. And for me, it is. I have the feeling that I learn a lot with that, and it's not because I learn that I will change my architecture, but I will probably modify or change some elements from this kind of meeting that we can have.
Now the world.
I never visited, but I was in. I was just in Oslo, and I remember it was really. I don't go inside because it was closed, but I remember it was really a very, very fantastic experience to be there on the place.
The world is going through a terrible crisis now, as usual, but this is the very present crisis. And I would like to ask you, if you have a look at that present or the current crisis, which is your main concern as architects in front of that global situation?
No, we can be. It's sad. It's sad and disappointing to see some events, and but I think both of us, we are so sure of the possibility of inventing, of making the things differently, of that we can easily find good solution or good answer to plenty of problems, that I think the optimism should be totally the good point to follow.
Kjetil?
I think my biggest fear is not necessarily related to how, well, it is related to the fact that we might not find collaborative models where we can utilize the knowledge base that we actually have. It is a worry, because I see silo thinking as one of everyday businesses, and it's not happening. But my biggest fear is, maybe outside of architecture, I think, is nationalism. And that, to me, right now, is something where you mix the terminologies of politics into some sort of egocentric thinking on small scale. And to me, that probably is currently the largest danger. To close borders, to switch back into protecting ourselves from everything else.
In fact, just to follow, perhaps, I think we have to come back to an extreme proximity. Because in the same time you have this nationalism, you can see sometimes two people and the way of their relation, how interesting it can be, even if they are from different countries or different people, or how they help themselves. I remember when I was in Africa, I remember that there was a period where it was so dry that plenty of villages in the north of the desert of the Sahara, they had absolutely nothing to eat for many years. And when we reach one very, very little village, we see that this little group of 50 or 100 people, they just keep one animal safe, and they feed this animal in order to give to the people that would come as a present. And for me, it's
nice. Yeah, it's beyond any type of generosity that we would ever have in this type of Western world. We're sitting on we're sitting on what we have.
Yeah.
We should move our asses.
I have a couple of very specific questions just to end, because they want me to end. But Alejandro Aravena, in the current Venice Biennale, has listed a few issues that he says architects should address. And among them, inequality, which is the biggest problem maybe going on in the world nowadays. I would like to know, what, in your view, what could architects do to reduce it?
Well, there are many levels of inequalities, right? So even in local communities, you will have inequality. I don't think that we will be able to move away from a certain level of inequality within the acceptance of a capitalistic system. Simply because it's based on a 2080 model. And based on that particular fact, you will have to fight within the 80% if you're going to make the difference, but that will then only lift the 80% up to, let's say, or sink it down to 70-30. But the 30% will increase again. So all of a sudden you will be back to 2080. Which is this stable kind of almost inevitable way of looking at things. And I hate the fact that I have to take that on board. But I do believe that the only thing you can do is to do your best when you have the possibilities and when you're allowed to do it.
Mm-hmm. Something else?
I don't know, I want to work in Europa after working in Africa. I think the real problems are there. The real constraints, the wrong way of thinking, of looking to the problems. When I go to Africa or when I go to Bangkok or to Thailand, I see invention, precisely. A sort of daily life invention. And here, I see the situations blocked. A sort of minimum for all, no ambition. restriction, constraints, regulations, norms. No freedom, no freedom. And so probably some countries in Africa are in a really tough situation, hard situations, but I am sure that they keep the way on being inventive. So I think for me, what I would like to change, it is to change something here in Europa.
Okay, this is an idea. Well, I think this is the final point. Thank you very much to you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.